The Giants have signed Carlos Correa, and Millard Thomas from Locked On D-backs is going to join me to discuss the ramifications of this signing for the Giants and for the division at large. We'll get into it next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts. And as I said, yes, I'm going to be talking here with Millard Thomas from Locked On D-backs. This was recorded like a day ago, and so it was before Carlos Rodon actually signed with the New York Yankees last night. And so we do have some Carlos Rodon discussion, including me saying I didn't think it was likely they would re-sign him, and sure enough, they don't. But wide-ranging conversation, mostly centered around the Giants and their acquisition of Carlos Correa and just their offseason in total, Mitch Haniger, the pitchers they've signed, etc. So without further delay, here is Millard Thomas from Locked On D-backs.
For today's show, we got a crossover with Ben Kaspick of Locked On Giants. So without further ado, because Ben Kaspick is the hottest guy in the Locked On network today, I was 10th on the list of this man's bookings today because everyone is trying to do a crossover with Ben, but he was able to carve out a little niche of time for me today to talk a little Carlos Correa to the Bay. So Ben Kaspick, without further ado, how you doing today, sir?
Oh, I'm doing great, Millard, and thank you. They actually canceled me on the national show, so I guess they don't want me as much as they should because it's big news. Carlos Correa, like you said, going to the Bay, huge news.
Just another sign of baseball being pushed to the side. We got huge signings going on this offseason, and we don't even make it to the national show. Just straight disrespect, because I first want to start off, before we get to the Carlos Correa signing, I just want to talk about the MLB offseason as a whole, because I think this has been one of the more fun offseasons we've seen in general, maybe since that free agent frenzy we had last year, because I feel like since like 2016, 2017, there was kind of a heel turn with the offseason where it's like these mega stars, mega free agents that hit the offseason pool. It took them months to get signed. Like pre-2016, it felt like once the winter meetings rolled around, we saw so many transactions happen. But the last few years, it felt like post-winter meetings, it almost took like a month out of before pitchers and catchers reported, before we saw a lot of the big name free agents get signed. But this offseason, it's almost been like every other day you see a big name free agent signed. We saw that Carlos Correa yesterday. A day before it'd be a Chris Bassett. A day before that would be a Cody Bellinger, Trey Turner. Like, it felt like we've had consistent news from day one of the offseason till now. So how do you feel this offseason has been from an entertainment value?
It's been great. What you were alluding to there was terrible. I really, really disliked when, the example I think of that's the most prominent was when Bryce Harper and Manny Machado were 26 years old, going into their age 26 season. That's a super rare young age for two elite players in our game. And it took them until like February or March, even in one of their cases, I think. It just dragged on when teams should be knocking down doors trying to get these guys into their organization. And in hindsight, any team would love to have either of those players on the contracts they ultimately signed. So I don't know exactly what was going on there. There was just this like analytical mindset, kind of making sure that the deal was the right kind of money, and it wasn't really good for the game. And so this offseason, it took a while. Like, it took until right around when the winter meetings were about to get going, but in the last week and a half or so, like you said, pretty much all of the top players are signed. And I'm happy in large part because the Giants got one of them. It was looking dicey there for a minute, but yeah, it's great. Hopefully this continues because it's much better this way.
Yeah, and it's hard to find the exact reason why baseball kind of went through this the last few years. Like maybe it started when you saw those Albert Pujols and the Josh Hamiltons and the CJ Wilsons. They all got those fat, mega long-term contracts, and then all those teams were like pretty unhappy as soon as those players got signed to those contracts. So maybe baseball then flipped their philosophy. They're like Manny Machado's, the Bryce Harpers. We're gonna have to wait on those players because do we actually want to give out a 10-year deal? But now you're like 3 years in, 4 years into those deals, and you're like, yeah, Bryce Harper's MVP. He's leading his team to the championship series. Manny Machado's a top 3 MVP candidate as well. You're like, you know what? Maybe it's actually smart. Yeah, the years aren't always going to be nice, but I would rather have a star in his prime for the next 7 years on my team than rather him seeing signed elsewhere. Because this offseason, 11 years for Bogarts, 13 years for Carlos Correa. And I feel like it's probably time to tar Carlos Correa, Ben Kaspick, because the Giants have been up and down when it comes to their emotions this offseason. It felt like they've had some high highs with almost getting judged or some low lows, I should say, with almost getting judged. But now they're riding the highs with the Carlos Correa signing. So when you saw Carlos Correa, the Jeff Passanbaum Correa to the Giants, what was your first reaction when you saw Correa to the Giants? And then what was your second reaction when you saw it was a 13-year mega deal?
My first reaction was disbelief. It caught me off guard. I was just, checking on Twitter like I do when you know that your team is in on these players from time to time. And I just happened to be checking in right around when I think he sent it out. And it was disbelief. It was like, is this real? Is this actually happening? Because part of what was baked into my mind was what the Giants thought they were getting Aaron Judge for a minute because another reporter essentially said that they were, but Passan is kind of
call him out. Who is
John
that
Heyman? Okay,
yeah.
John Heyman said that the Giants were getting Judge, and they didn't, and so that was rough. Talk about a roller coaster of emotion, and I'm sure we'll get into that maybe more later. But for first reaction, it was just, oh my God, I cannot believe what I'm seeing with my eyes, because it really felt like the Giants needed to do something drastic this offseason, and Carlos Correa was kind of the last chance. And it felt like, they have money to spend. They offered Aaron Judge a huge contract. They have money to spend. And so just the confirmation from a reporter as legit as Jeff Passan, I couldn't believe it. That was my first reaction. And then I saw 13,350 and I thought, holy cow, they did the dang thing. They did it. Like, this is what it takes to get these guys. And if you look at the other contracts for Trey Turner, Xander Bogaerts, they're older than Correa and they got 11 years. And so it doesn't really shock me. I thought 12 was where he would get, but 13 is just one more than that. And actually there's some reports that they wanted to go as long as possible, maybe even 15, just to spread out the money over a longer period of time to lower the average annual value. But it was shocking and ultimately a very good thing, in my opinion.
So what do you think about a contract that's that long for that amount of money? Because I think my opinion has been, I think you have to look at it in context. Who is the player and what kind of team he's going to? Because Xander Bogaerts, Carlos Correa's, those are the guys that are 30 and younger, right in the middle of their prime. And maybe the last 3 to 4 years of that deal isn't going to work out. But if I'm a San Diego Padres fan, I get to watch Bogaerts, Machado, Juan Soto and Fernando Tatis in their primes for like a better part of the next half decade plus. If I'm a Giants fan, I get Correa, I get Logan Webb, and then those two are big foundational pieces in the middle of my lineup. Like, I think it depends on what kind of team you have. If it's Carlos Correa going 13 years to the Minnesota Twins, then I probably don't love that contract as much. But when it's Bogaerts or Correa going to teams who we know have history of winning and building contenders, then I think I'm a little bit more okay giving out a long-term fat contract like that. Because I also wouldn't want to give out a 13-year deal to like a Dansby Swanson. If the Giants did that, we would be having a different discussion, I think.
Yes, we would. And for me, for Correa specifically, it comes down to the fact that he's going to play almost all of 2023 at age 28. And so it is rare to get a really good player who's that young. He's one of the youngest players in this free agent class. And basically the way I think about it is it's kind of like, if you think of it as a 10-year deal or even a 9 or 8-year deal, I think that they're comfortable with that amount of money over that period, because you're getting a lot of prime years in there, 28, 29, 30, 31, even 32. You don't really expect much decline in those years. And so you're getting so many of the peak years that you're paying kind of more then, and you're imagining he's going to be worth less later, but call it a 10-year, $350 million deal. I think they would do that too, but the difference is they don't want to have the average annual value at 35 million a year. They get it here down to 26.9 million a year, and that number gets, factored into the accounting for the luxury tax threshold. And so you start getting penalized if you spend over a certain amount, and that amount is based on the average annual value. And so it's not so clever per se, but it's just a way of a kind of clever, I guess, way of reducing the annual potential tax burden by spreading it out over a longer period and just saying, okay, it's not going to look good at the end, but we'll live with it in the beginning when it's going to be a bargain. I mean, 26.9 million a year for Correa is going to be a bargain given his age and what you're likely to get for the next 5 years. At that point, he'll be underpaid. At the end, he'll be potentially overpaid, but it's not that high of an AAV. I mean, Judge got 40 a year into age 39, and Correa is getting 26.9 into age 40. And so it's actually, I think, arguably a better value than the Aaron Judge deal, even though it's longer.
If you're an audio listener, I need you to head to the YouTube channel Locked On Diamondbacks or Locked On Giants, because behind Ben right now, I just noticed he's got a sign in the corner all lit up. It says Carlos Correa season. How quickly did you put that up, Ben, after seeing the signing?
Actually, I've had it up for
you've had
a
it
couple
up?
weeks. Okay. 1 week. I had it. It did say Aaron Judge season for the longest time, and then as soon as Aaron Judge went back to the Yankees, it became Carlos Correa season. Like I said, there was anticipation here that they were going to try to get this guy, and so a lot riding on this, and that's why it was so relieving when they finally got it done.
Well, I want to ask if there's any other moves up the Giants' sleeve. But before we get there, Ben, I first got a really important message. If you're hanging out with some friends and putting back a few drinks, a few becomes a few too many. As the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think of calling for a ride. Nah, you live nearby. You can make it home okay. It's no big deal. What are the odds you get pulled over anyway? And even so, what's the worst that could happen? Your insurance goes up. You lose your license, you lose your job, you total your car, you kill someone. Everyone knows about the risks of drunk driving. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. All right, let's get back into the podcast, Ben, because I did want to ask you about, I thought it was interesting that Carlos Correa, Trey Turner, and Xander Bogaerts, they're all basically going to be paid until they're 41 years old. Do you think that was like intentional by these teams to like basically say we're all going to stop paying these dudes at the same time? Like they're all basically going to be free agents again at the same time at age 41.
I think it was more of a precedent was set. Like as soon as who signed first? Trey Turner, right? Yeah, Trey Turner signed first, and it was longer than expected. This was kind of the start of this trend, where I think we all thought Trey Turner was going to get maybe 8 years. And then as soon as he gets 11, it set the precedent that you're paying these guys into being about 40 years old. And then as soon as Xander Bogaerts was able to get the same thing, it became apparent that the younger Correa, you're just going to have a hard time getting him unless you are able to go to that same level. And what it does for the player is when you add extra years, the total money goes up. And so, it became apparent it was going to take, I mean, Turner got 300 million, and Correa is younger and arguably a little bit better maybe. And so, I don't know, California taxes are higher than in Philadelphia. Also, there was in Pennsylvania, the report that the Padres offered Trey Turner $342 million, and he took less money to go to the Phillies. And so that's another point. I just thought the Giants are going to have to go to that level in order to get Correa, and they did. But I just think it was based on precedent. These other guys aren't going to say, I'll take 8 years when these guys are getting 11. I think it just they built off each other, and it set a new trend basically.
Yeah. Do you think after Aaron Judge was no longer come to the Giants, do you think Carlos Correa was the new number one target for the Giants? Do you think Dansby Swanson was a real possibility? Like, was this the best case scenario for the Giants post the Aaron Judge not coming to the Bay?
I do. I think that entering the offseason, he was number 2 on their list. He was number 2 on my list. He just made a lot of sense in every single way. And in some ways, not all ways, but in some ways, it's actually a contract that could end up being a better one than the one to Aaron Judge, because Judge gets 9 years, and Correa gets 13, but the extra years are in the front, not at the back. You're getting more years in the prime and about the same at the end. It ends, Judge is going to be 39 when his ends. Correa will have just turned 41. So it's kind of like 39 versus 40 when it ends. So maybe 1 extra year on the back, but 3 extra years on the front. And so Judge, because of just how much star power there is and how much of just a huge, just maybe the face of baseball in some ways, perhaps besides Shohei Ohtani right now, and the fact that he grew up a Giants fan nearby, they had to make that effort. But as soon as he didn't sign, and it was always going to be a challenge luring him from the New York Yankees, I thought, and everybody kind of thought. And after Judge, yeah, Correa was, I mean, there were other good players here, but I think Correa was number 2.
Yeah, I also think it's funny how the Padres seem to like offered every free agent like the biggest contract that they could have gotten, but they chose to go somewhere else, mostly because for Aaron Judge's legacy. And then for Trey Turner, I think it was maybe because he's reunited with his boy Bryce Harper in Philadelphia. So maybe there was a little bit more connection with the Philadelphia Phillies. But for this Giants team, like, how realistic did you feel like it was entering the offseason that Aaron Judge might come to the Bay? Because like you said, he grew up a San Francisco Giants fan. He's from the Bay, but obviously he's back with the New York Yankees. So in hindsight, it's a little bit easier to say, oh yeah, I always felt like he was going back to the Yankees. But realistically, how did you feel entering the offseason? Did you really think you had a realistic shot? Obviously, after you saw John Heyman say it was a done deal, you really felt like it was happening. But even before that, what were the chances you had Aaron Judge coming to the Bay?
I definitely thought it was a legitimate shot because the stars kind of aligned in that there was a chance that he might actually want to play here. And then there was definitely the reality that the team wanted him and that they have the money to do it. It's exactly the situation where they feel like they need star talent, which they didn't have last year. Posey retired. They were just kind of devoid. Logan Webb, really good player, but an offensive player, a guy who plays every day versus starting pitcher every 5th day is different. And they've had Posey, and before that Lincecum, and before that Bonds and Will Clark, and just stars. And they just didn't have it. And they have kind of so much money freed up that it made a lot of sense that Judge, they could possibly get him here. And we said all along, the money will probably end up being similar, and it's just going to come down to where does Aaron Judge want to be. And so we were just speculating, where does he want to be? And it was hard to rationalize he's going to want to leave the legacy of the New York Yankees, but their fans booed him in the playoffs, and he didn't like that the contract negotiations that, when he rejected that extension prior to 2022, he didn't like that Brian Cashman went public saying what the offer was that he turned down. And so the Giants were always a long shot, but I think of any other team, they had the best shot besides New York.
All right, so it sounds like Aaron Judge might have been a realistic possibility. Tough that he didn't come to the Giants. I don't know how scared I would have been if he was in San Fran because he is a megastar, but at the time he would have signed with the Giants. I didn't love the rest of the Giants roster just yet, but they've made a few more signings since that fake Aaron Judge reported to the San Francisco Giants. But I do want to ask you really quick, just a random question of, what do you think was the worst feeling? Giants fans thinking that they were getting Aaron Judge, or Padres fans the year before at the trade deadline thinking they were getting Max Scherzer?
That's a tough one. They're pretty similar in a lot of ways. I want to say the Giants because, that Aaron Judge, Max Scherzer was a rental, you would have had him for a few months. And Aaron Judge, we're talking the rest of his career. We're talking when he goes into the Hall of Fame, he could be wearing a Giants hat, and just earth-shattering kind of league-changing signing, truly. Even though it might not age well, given his size and that he's already 31, but still, I don't know. I mean, it was pretty rough for both franchises at that those fake reports coming out.
Yeah, and considering Aaron Judge was talking basically to the whole NL West outside of the D-backs and Colorado Rockies, I think I would have liked him going to the Giants instead of the Dodgers or Padres, just because if I saw a team with Tatis, Soto, Machado, and Judge, I would have thrown up in my mouth. If I saw him with Mookie, Freddie Freeman on the Dodgers, I would have thrown up in my mouth. I would have at least been able to stomach Aaron Judge going back home. It would have been a nice story. Him been basically Barry Bonds 2.0, would have been the same kind of athletic profile as a Barry Bonds. So I would have not hated the move if the Giants got Aaron Judge, but it didn't happen, so we don't even got to talk about it, and he went back to the New York Yankees. But since Aaron Judge didn't go to the Giants did pivot and make some other moves with the Mitch Hanigers, the Ross Stripling. So outside of the Carlos Correa signing, how do you feel about the rest of the Giants offseason? Do you feel like they're winning the offseason? Pre-Carlos Correa, did you like how their offseason was going?
Pre-Carlos Correa, it was kind of more of the same for how they've operated in recent years, which is that all of their signings are like fine, and all of their signings are on paper like solid moves, but at the same time they weren't needle moving enough. Like it really did feel like going into this specific offseason, this was the time where they had to make a major splash. And no disrespect to Mitch Haniger, he's just not that guy. I think he's a good player, but he's not. I mean, the contract reflects it. It's a $43.5 million deal over 3 years versus Judge getting $360 million and Correa getting $350. So no disrespect, but I mean, it was important though. Haniger, they actually haven't really had like an everyday position player making that kind of money from, signing them through free agency. Haniger grew up a Giants fan himself, is local to the Bay Area himself, and the Manaea signing is kind of curious to me because he really had a bad year with the Padres, but the Giants have done really well with kind of fixing guys who have had some success in the past. And he was pretty darn good for a several year span there with the A's. He was like the front of that rotation, and they had a couple years where they were like 97 game winners, and he was at the front of that rotation. And so to pick him up on a short-term deal, I didn't love that one, but then Ross Stripling, in addition to Manaea, I think is suddenly they've got a really deep rotation with Logan Webb, Alex Cobb, Alex Wood, Anthony DeSclafani, Manaea, Stripling, Jacob Junis, and then they've got a really good pitching prospect who's ready to debut this year. So they just have a lot of options, but in the same way, like Mitch Haniger is not Correa, those guys are not Carlos Rodon, who was really good for the Giants last year, like really, really good. So you could make a case that the rotation is not as well off as it was last year. It is deeper, but it has less upside. But they really needed to put that bow and just to make that massive move to make all these other moves work.
Yeah, because I like the Mitch Haniger signing. I thought it was an expensive deal, and I think he's a real upside guy. He's been dealing with injuries the last couple of years, but he's someone, if he's right, he's like a legit, could be 40 home run guy for you. With the Jock Peterson, that could be some real power in your outfield. I like the Ross Stripling move. I don't think he's like some elite frontline rotation starter, but if he's your like number 3 starter in rotation, I think you feel pretty good about that. Don't love the Shaman 9 move, like you said, because it's coming off such a terrible year, but it's not like a bad flyer move. Like he was good in Oakland, so if he can get back to that, then you do like the move if you're the Giants. But I want to know, like, what's up with Carlos Rodon or the Giants? I mean, they ponied up the money for Carlos Correa. They was ready to give the money to Aaron Judge. Are they going to let their guy Carlos Rodon hit the free agent market? Because we know a team like the New York Yankees might be sniffing around. Seems like Carlos Rodon is seeking maybe a 6-7 year deal, probably like a Jacob deGrom level deal where he's getting 6 years, making around $30 million annually.
It's an interesting one to follow, and a lot of fans and myself included, you see what he did last year and you're like, why would you not want that guy on your team? But then you start thinking, what is this going to look like? When it was reported that, or expected that he would get 5 years, which is what the last couple of years we've seen, like really good starting pitchers. Kevin Gausman is a direct parallel in that he was really good for the Giants and then he got his longer term deal, but it wasn't with the Giants. So I think a lot of people expect even if Rodon was getting 5 years, that it would be similar, because not only did the Giants not get Gosman to re-sign, Gosman said they didn't make him an offer. And so that just tells you all you need to know. Like, the question is why? Why didn't they make Kevin Gosman an offer after how good he was for them over a couple seasons? And for Rodon, I think that if you look at the evidence about how do long-term deals for starting pitchers go, they very often go very poorly. I do this exercise every year, and I just did it last night. I look back at like who were considered the top starting pitcher free agents 5 years ago.
Okay.
And if you look at last year, 5 years ago, the guys who would actually be entering year 5 right now, some of them they got more than 5 years. Number 1 was Patrick Corbin, who has turned into just an utter from the Diamondbacks, right? He was really good. I mean, if you look at his numbers the year before he hit free agency, they look like Carlos Rodon, like with the crazy high strikeouts, all that stuff. He gets this big deal from the Nationals, and he's just become like basically the worst pitcher in the game. And he had a good first year in Washington, helped them win a World Series, but it's been a disaster ever since. Also on that list of the top pitchers was Dallas Keuchel, Jay Happ, Yusei Kikuchi. It's just like mind-boggling that these guys were considered the best starters in those markets, and now they're either terrible or like out of baseball. And so when you're talking about Rodon, I just think that they'll kind of act like they're in it, but I don't expect them to bring him back simply because of the track record of these contracts for pitchers.
So do you and the Giants have the same philosophy then, that it's better to give like let's say a 13-year, 10-year deal to a position player of a Judge or a Carlos Correa's caliber instead of giving that 6-7-year deal to a Rodon or a Kevin Gosman?
Yeah, I think I do, especially if you're the Giants who have had success with these cheaper deals, frankly, for pitchers, shorter and cheaper. Like DeSclafani was really good in year 1. He was not last year, and he had an ankle injury that he cost him the season. Same story with Wood, really good the first year he was here, and then not so good last year. But Alex Cobb ended up, if you look at the peripherals on Cobb, like the FIP and all that, he had a fantastic year if the defense was any good behind him. And then, this is where I think they want to be drafting and developing at their best, because essentially when you get a young player who comes up as a pitcher or any position, it's like a 6-year deal with a club option for every single year. You're not obligated to the whole thing. You're only obligated year by year. And so I think that that's kind of the goal. And it doesn't make people happy per se, because they like these guys. They like Kevin Gosman. They like Carlos Rodon because they're so good when they're here, and then the team lets them leave. So it's not really popular, but I do share the understanding. I mean, look at Cueto and Samardzija were the two most recent long-term Giants pitcher signings, and both of those didn't go well. Barry Zito didn't go well. Zach Greinke's contract was pretty solid for a lot of it, but it ultimately ended up not looking so great at the end either. So some of them are okay, but most of them turn into disasters pretty quickly.
Hey, the Giants let one go in free agency, and he came over to Arizona, and I don't think D-backs fans are too happy with Madison Bumgarner on the fact that he's on.
Forgot about him. Exactly.
Yeah, but I do wonder, if there's like a what-if scenario where the Giants just pay their pitchers and then they have like a rotation of Logan Webb, Kevin Gosman, and Carlos Rodon for the next 5 years. I wonder what that team would look like too. Now, maybe you sacrifice the Carlos Correas in your lineup. Maybe your lineup's not as good. But if you have like those three at the top of your rotation, then that's like a whole different kind of building strategy you can to have a contender. Now, I don't know long term if it's as safe as going the lineup route like we've discussed with the position players, but I do think that would have been a pretty fun scenario. But Ben, I do want to ask you if there's any other big offseason signings that you think are coming down the Giants' way. But if you want to bet on the Giants taking the NL West title in 2023, do you know where you have to go to, Ben Caspick?
The only place I go is Bet Online, and we've been with them all offseason long. They've been great with Aaron Judge and Carlos Correa odds and all that. We've been talking about it like every day.
Yeah, BetOnline has all the odds. Go to betonline.net. It's your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. When I wake up Sunday mornings before the NFL slate of games, I head to betonline.net. I look for the Saints, and I see who are they playing. Do the Saints have plus money? Are they the underdogs? Because if they are, I'm putting the house on my team, the New Orleans Saints. And if you want to do the same, I wouldn't suggest betting on the Saints, but if you want to do the same, go to betonline.net because you get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball and World Cup. We've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info in. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, here with Ben Caspick of Locked On Giants, talking a whole bunch of Giants because they've had a crazy offseason so far, Ben. I want to know, is it going to get any crazier? So do we expect Carlos Rodon coming back to the Giants? I know we just did a whole discussion about how it's not smart to do long-term deals for pitchers, but maybe they do the Carlos Correa contract for Rodon. I'm not talking about this year's Carlos Correa contract. I'm talking about last year's, where he got a fat deal, but there's a whole bunch of opt-outs, and maybe they do the short-term, here's a whole lot of money, but here's a whole lot of opt-outs as well. Maybe there's some other free agents. I mean, we know they're talking to Dansby Swanson before the Carlos Correa deal. Maybe they just go all in on the left side of the infield and put Carlos Correa at third base because allegedly he was okay playing third base if he was going to be signed to the New York Mets. So maybe you do Correa at third and then put Dansby Swanson as shortstop because Brandon Crawford is getting pretty damn old. So you got to figure out a plan after he gets, he's going to be in the nursing home pretty soon, Ben. So are there any other big offseason signings coming down the Giants' way, or at least, peripheral signings?
There's definitely peripheral signings. When it comes to big signings, I wouldn't anticipate it because there's only a couple guys left, and you mentioned them, Carlos Rodon and Dansby Swanson. Other than that, there's not really that super high-end impact talent. Carlos Correa was one of the last guys. But I wouldn't rule out trades because, and I mean, if Rodon came around, it's like Correa last year. We expected him to get this massive deal, and it just didn't come to fruition. And he ends up with this shorter term deal with the opt-outs. And if his market came to that, he does have the qualifying offer attached to his free agency from the Giants. The Giants are the only team that wouldn't have to surrender a draft pick / international bonus pool money by signing him. So I don't see them giving him a 7-year deal. But hey, I do think that there's a real incentive here, that they're a real motivation by this team to get dramatically better. And right now they're quite a bit better, but I do think there's more to do. And I think we could see some trades because they need another outfielder, and specifically they would like another good defensive center fielder. And there aren't a lot of those guys who can also hit a little bit in free agency, but this is like twisting it back on you. The D-backs are one of the teams.
Oh, no. I knew where this was going. I knew you were segueing.
You got outfielders.
I saw it a mile away.
Yeah. I mean, Alec Thomas, Jake McCarthy. McCarthy killed the Giants in 2022. He was a real menace to the San Francisco Giants. And I know that the D-backs are shopping one of their outfielders, Dalton Varsho. I know he would probably cost the most of the available guys. Corbin Carroll kind of off limits, but those are some real intriguing names you got there. And I think the Giants will check in on those guys. I don't know if an in-division trade is all that likely, but they also, under the radar, I think that they'd like to make an upgrade at the catcher position where Joey Bart was a top pick and a top prospect. But if you just look at some of the numbers, I mean, he's really struggled in his major league career. Made some strides last year, but also went through stretches where he was striking out 50% of the time over sustained periods, which is just too high. Half of his plate appearances ending in strikeouts, and so they also need bullpen help. They had huge bullpen regression in 2022 versus 2021, and so they're definitely in the market for bullpen help. And this would be a fun storyline. Tyler Rogers, the submarine righty, his twin brother is Taylor Rogers, the good lefty. And so there's been a lot of rumors that perhaps the Giants would look to reunite those two and have a couple of twins in the late innings coming out of the pen, one lefty, one righty. I think that would be pretty fun.
Is Trevor Rogers related to any of them?
I don't think so.
No? Okay. That would just be pretty interesting. Well, to talk to your point about the D-backs outfielders in the San Francisco Giants, my whole thing with the D-backs outfield is Corbin Carroll's, of course, off limits. I'm okay moving a Varsho or Jake McCarthy or Alec Thomas, but it can't be for prospects. The D-backs are never going to get good and get to a place where they have some stability and are a playoff contender if every time they develop someone that looks like they could be a quality major leaguer, they trade him for freaking bum prospects, because that's what's going to happen. If you traded Dalton Varsho to a team like the Giants, you're going to try to get back a couple of prospects, and more than likely they're probably not going to pan out, because I doubt the Giants are going to give up a blue chipper for a Dalton Varsho. And real quick, Jake McCarthy in 13 games batted over 400 with over 1,000 OPS against the San Francisco Giants. So yes, he was a Giants killer. If I'm trading a Dalton Varsho, Jake McCarthy, Alec Thomas, I'm looking at a team like the Houston Astros, where they have so many starters in that rotation, a Christian Javier, a Luis Garcia, both 25 years of age. I want a deal like that where I could get back a win-now player, a guy who could help out my major league roster right now, and preferably a guy that's 28 years of younger. I don't want to just trade Dalton Varsho or Jake McCarthy or Alec Thomas for prospects, because those guys are still so young. Those guys are borderline prospects themselves. They were just in the minor leagues just a year ago. So I want those guys to develop. I don't think any of them are actually going to be moved this offseason. I think it's a lot of chatter. I think Mike Hazen wants to see what the value he has for those guys. He's going to ask for the moon. He's going to ask for every team's best prospect just to see if anyone would bite. But otherwise, I think he's just checking in on the value of these guys. And maybe next offseason, I think it's more likely to trade someone, because I think you want another year to really see what you have with the Thomases, see if what you saw from Jake McCarthy was the real deal, because how he looked this past season, like no one expected Jake McCarthy to look that good, and he looked like a legit major leaguer this past season. So I think you want another year of Dalton Varsho progressing, Jake McCarthy progressing, Alec Thomas progressing, and then of course the superstar Corbin Carroll coming into his own. So I don't think the D-backs will move an outfielder right now. And I definitely don't think they're going to do it with the in-division rival of the San Francisco Giants, because the Giants have a pretty solid roster on paper right now. But Ben, how do you think your Giant team, as it currently stands, stacks up against the rest of the NL West? Because I still probably have the Giants and the Padres on a tier above the Giants. But pre-Carlos Correa signing, I would have said D-backs and Giants are on the same tier. But now I might have it Padres, Dodgers on the same tier, the Giants on their own tier, the D-backs on their own tier, and then the Rockies 50 feet of garbage, and then there's the Colorado Rockies. Sorry, Paul Holden.
I'm with you 100%. I think that, look, we've been doing this for a few years, and none of us had the Giants as the top team or even close to it in 2021. So all of this just is based on how it looks, not necessarily how it will go. But yeah, I would agree by how it looks. I mean, the Dodgers, we didn't really get into them tonight, but the Dodgers have been very quiet. I mean, their only moves, they've lost a lot of guys. They lost Trey Turner. They lost somebody else, and they re-signed Clayton Kershaw. And then they just signed Noah Syndergaard, and that's been their offseason. And right now, their projected payroll is actually below the San Francisco Giants. So it's, the Dodgers are having a very un-Dodgers-like offseason. And as we've mentioned, most of the top talent is gone. But they could still sneak in and kind of be an under-the-radar team for a Carlos Rodon. But I would be foolish to say the Giants are ahead of either of those teams. I mean, the Padres on paper just continue to be a behemoth. And so I'd have, just like you, the Dodgers, Padres, Giants. I think the D-backs are more competitive than people give them credit for, and will continue to be that way.
That's right,
and
man.
Some really, really good young talent. I mean, my goodness, some of those guys are just scary to think about what that team could become. But on the other hand, these other teams ahead of them are just, from a spending perspective, are kind of capable of doing a lot that way. And I don't think the D-backs are doing that. They've been very quiet in terms of spending money this offseason. And then, 50 feet of garbage, maybe maybe more, and then Colorado.
D-backs need ownership that's willing to spend money, because I'm tired of people saying Arizona is a small market. If you care about media markets, Arizona, Phoenix is like one of the biggest media markets in the country. That's a poppin' market. Like, Arizona is not a tiny market. We're slowly getting more expensive when you look at inflation and everything like that. So the only reason the D-backs don't spend money is because they have cheap ownership. If you bring in, that's also the case with all MLB teams. If you have a Stephen Cohen running every major league team, then imagine how exciting the offseason would be, because it would be a bidding war for every free agent. And as long as the D-backs got cheap ownership, they're never going to spend money like the other teams. But you did mention the Dodgers. Do you think the Dodgers, because they've had this quiet offseason, are just like waiting for their perfect move? Like, could you see them still going out there and signing a Rodon or a Dansby Swanson? Because even if they just stand pat, like they're still going to have Kershaw, Julio Urias, Tony Gonsolin, and Walker Buehler in their rotation. They're still going to have multiple MVPs from the Mookie Betts to Freddie Freeman's in their lineup, Will Smith's in their lineup, maybe get bounce back season from Muncy, still have Chris Taylor. Like the bullpen's going to be stacked once again. Like let's not, make bones about it. They've lost a lot of pieces this offseason and they still got a stacked roster. So do you think the Giants are a team just waiting in the weeds, waiting for that perfect player that they want to pounce on? Or are you actually like, you know what? They might be okay just standing pat and lowering that payroll just a little bit? Maybe they want to get out of the luxury tax.
I think they want to get out of the luxury tax and reset it, because there's stiffer penalties when you're a repeat offender. I think if you do it 3 years in a row, it's the maximum in terms of repeat offenses, quote unquote, and it stays at that level unless you reset. And so I think they want to reset. They've kind of pretended like they were in on Aaron Judge. They were out there commenting like, we'd like a big right fielder who just hit a bunch of home runs to be on our roster. And then I read a report from, Ken Rosenthal, a very reputable reporter, who says they never were in on Judge at all. And so they're talking a big game, but they're not actually doing anything. And there's very few impact free agents. So, but they have been linked to Rodon. They have been linked to Dansby Swanson. I would not be shocked at all if they got either of those guys, or both. Honestly, I wouldn't be shocked. And then trades are a possibility. And then they're also involved in this Trevor Bauer lawsuit over whether or not they have to pay. So I think that is a factor. They've also got a lot of young talent. Like, they want to give these opportunities that otherwise you maybe can't give to guys like Gavin Lux and Miguel Vargas and others. So I think they want to, Dustin May, they want him to be in the rotation and all that. And also perhaps there's some thinking, like, when you're so much better than everybody else, maybe it makes your team a little flat come postseason because you haven't played competitive games leading into the playoffs. And so maybe they're like, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world if this isn't like a 25 game, division lead at the end of the season. So
I like this take. They need a little adversity.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, they just cruise. And like you said, they were so good. They had a 111 win roster. You lose a bunch of guys, and they're still easily a 95 win team, in my opinion. And so, it's not. They could just make a couple additions and probably win 100 games again. And so they'll be fine. Sadly.
Yeah, I think another reason they just throw their name out in these negotiations for the top stars might just be so they could drive up the bidding of the other teams, because the NL West has been so linked to the D-backs, or even linked to Xander Bogaerts. And then you got the Padres linked to the Judges, and the Giants linked to the Judges. And both teams might be interested in Carlos Correa. Like, maybe the Dodgers just throw their names in the hat. Even if they're not serious about those players, they're just like, yeah, we're going to go out there. We're going to add Aaron Judge to this machine that we've been working on the last few years. Because if you're the Padres or Giants, you're like, whoa, I can't let the Dodgers now go out there and get Aaron Judge. Let's go throw $400 million at him over 10 years. So maybe it was more of a negotiation tactic by the Dodgers than actually being like, you know what, we actually want to sign those guys to long-term deals and just stay in the luxury tax hell for the next 10 years. But Ben, one final question for you before we depart today. Who is the biggest offseason winner from the NL West so far? Is it the San Diego Padres or is it the San Francisco Giants?
Let's see. I've got all the moves pulled up. The big moves for the Padres, obviously, Xander Bogaerts, 11 years, $280 million, bringing back some relievers at high-ish contracts. I think it's the San Francisco Giants because, I mean, Xander Bogaerts, to me, that's like the one that looks like kind of the biggest quote-unquote overpay. I'm never going to complain about these owners pushing their chips in, but 11 years and 2 fewer prime years than Correa. So it's two fewer years than Correa, but for Correa, it's 2 more, not at the end, but at the front. And I think I thought Correa was just a better player anyway. And Giants needed this more than the Padres needed this. And so they needed to come away with a superstar, and they did. And I'm also a Giants fan. So what am I going to say? What am I going to say? What do you think? What is your opinion?
Yeah, I would say the Giants have had a better offseason just because they've pulled off more moves. I mean, got Carlos Correa. I like the Mitch Haniger sign. Like I said, I don't mind Ross Stripling. We'll see what happens with Carlos Rodon, because if he does leave the Giants, then maybe that recalibrates my expectations, because for the Padres, why I throw them in this is, yeah, Xander Bogaerts is like your one big offseason move. It's like kind of like the only big offseason move that they've had, but you're adding him to that core that you already had. The Giants are still trying to build something. They're adding Correa to be like one of those first foundational pieces on their roster, in their lineup. So for the Padres, it's like, I'm adding this superstar to already a superstar core to put us over the top, while the Giants still need a few more pieces. That's why I contend you could make an argument for the Padres, but I probably do lean the Giants. But I do want to know what happens with Carlos Rodon, because if they bring back a Rodon, if no other team's willing to pony up the money, he just takes a 1-year qualifying offer and then does it all again next year. And that drastically changes everything. You have the Webb, the Rodon, and the Ross Stripling, and then whatever you get from Anaya and all those other guys that you discussed. And then your lineup, hopefully you get guys like Joey Bart to bounce back. I know he really struggled, but he was a top prospect for you guys. So we'll see what happens with the San Francisco Giants. But I definitely do think they're back to being in the playoff mix, because pre-Carlos Correa, I was like, are we sure the Giants are better than the D-backs? But now I might concede that argument, Ben Kaspick. Any last thoughts before we depart today?
I'm just glad that so much has happened by December 14th. I remember the recent past when we were waiting into February for anything significant to happen. And it's been fun, and I hope it continues to stay fun, and I can't wait.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing. Thankful for MLB owners and front offices finally spending money again, getting aggressive, and not making us wait months for signings to happen, because we've seen it before where it's like, oh my God, we're 2-3 months in the offseason and still none of the top free agents have signed. When you look at basketball and football, all those top free agents are gone after a week, 2 weeks. Baseball has taken so long, but this has actually been a pretty great offseason, because like basketball, 80% free agents are signed after the first 2 weeks. So you get the free agent frenzy in the beginning, but then those last 2.5 months of the NBA offseason, it's kind of slow. It kind of drags out because everyone signed early. But at least with baseball, how it's gone, like we've discussed, it's like every other day. The last 2 months have just been good of the MLB offseason. Since the World Series ended, there hasn't been a lot of downside. Every week, I've had something discussed when it comes to free agency. So it's been a great time for Major League Baseball during this offseason for those reasons. Ben, where can the Locked On Diamondbacks listeners find you?
On Twitter at Ben Kaspick, and then the show is Locked On Giants, and it's on YouTube and Apple and all the places that you get podcasts, and the Odyssey app, of course, the Odyssey app as well. And what about you? Where can my listeners find you?
Yes, if you're already on YouTube, you can see the lower third at Creator Thomas 24 to follow me on Twitter. Look up Locked On Diamondbacks, both Twitter and Instagram. Find the podcast show on all your streaming platforms, and we're also on YouTube, Locked On Diamondbacks as well. Talking with Ben Kaspick of Locked On Giants, because the Giants have been making moves, spending money, and hopefully the D-backs open up their wallet soon, because all we've got to show so far this offseason is Miguel Castro. Ben, don't make that face, Ben. That's not the last face we want to see before we wrap up the pod today. Ben, thanks for hopping on today, sir, and I'll catch you next time.